This is Edna Gerstel interviewing Margaret Mudgett at her home, 2561 Roscommere Road, Los Angeles, November 3rd, 1988. Peg, why don't you start by giving us a brief biography of yourself?
Well, some people want to know how I ever got started in social work.
Right, that's important.
Since this was the 30s, maybe you can get anything sound. I guess that's a rewind.
Yeah, I wanted to get it back.
And although I graduated with just a general background, A.B. from Stanford, I ultimately got a master's in history and a general secondary teaching credential. But again, nobody wanted a teacher. So I became a volunteer. An older woman friend of mine got me involved with the community chess campaign, the forerunner of the present United Way. And inasmuch as I was young, inexperienced, and had loads of friends who were in the same position as I was quite a godsend to that campaign because it was very easy for me to organize door-to-door volunteers for it. So after 2 or 3 years of volunteering in the community chess campaign, one of the women asked me if I would be interested in working for the Girl Scouts. And I indicated that I didn't know anything about the Girl Scouts, but I'd be interested in finding out. So I went to the local Girl Scout office and heard some good things about the organization. And one of the best was that they were having a training course at Asilomar the next month. And it was to be given by Edith Conant, who is a sister of the then president of Harvard University, and she was on the national staff of the Girl Scouts. And the course was on the organization and administration of a local council. It was perhaps the clearest and best given course I'd ever had.
Oh.
And so I lucked in.
Yes, you did.
And I was quite impressed. So, the other thing that was told to me was that if I did go into the Girl Scouts, to remember it was just pin running. And you couldn't even buy a pin with my first 6 months' pay because I had to work free for 6 months because I didn't have any money. But anyway, that was the start of 8 years of working with the Girl Scouts in Los Angeles and in Burbank, and then coming back to Los Angeles as training director. And again, I lucked in. Margaret Murray Brownlee was another national staff member of the Girl Scouts, was giving a course in training methods. And I took it, and I certainly thought it excelled any of the courses I'd had in my education department in college. And so those were two real good things. During the war, though, there were new things, new problems, new dimensions coming up, and one of them was the start of the Los Angeles Youth Project in response to the Zoot Suit riot.
Oh, yes.
Remember those?
Yes.
Yeah. And we thought it was just a tremendous thing because the United Way, or rather Community Chess, allocated $250,000
Oh, my.
to 10 agencies to start this project. But it certainly made us all much more conscious of the needs of many of our younger citizens. Yes. And it made me feel, certainly, that I'd probably worked with the Girl Scouts as long as I needed to, and that I wanted to find something else. So, 1945, when the war was over, I resigned from the Girl Scouts, and I did legwork on Sorenson Recreation and Youth Services Survey in Los Angeles. It was going on then, which was an excellent addition for me because I got acquainted with so many different parts of Los Angeles.
Oh, yes.
And the underserved and where the greatest needs were and so forth. And I also applied for a job on the youth project staff as an area coordinator, which eventually materialized. And that again was a very interesting experience, and was a good deal of emphasis on community organization. And one of the things that I recall very well, one of the places I visited in working on that survey was the old Neighborhood Settlement Association down on Wilson Street in East Los Angeles.
Oh, yeah.
Just before they gave it up. Well, it was given up, and it was out of operation for a year. And apparently it's sponsored by the Episcopal Diocese, and apparently someone from the diocese asked the youth project for suggestions for a new executive director for NYA. And as I was an Episcopalian, I was suggested. And that started a long 25-year association with the agency. And we, among the areas that were underserved were West Los Angeles, the Sawtelle area specifically, which has changed a lot since then.
Yes, it has. It's the affluent area.
But it was a pretty needy area in those days, and Venice was also.
Yeah.
So we decided, of course, incidentally, the agency had virtually no money, and they thought a decentralized program sounded fine because it didn't mean a big capital investment for buildings. And it made sense to use some community buildings and community facilities. Our budget the first year, the total budget for the agency, the first year I went there, was $20,000. As you can see, it had to go quite a ways. I inveigled one of the young men who was working for the youth project on their special services unit to come to NYA as a group worker at that time, and also Margaret Vanderwerker, who came to us from the YWCA and the USO, and those were our two original group workers. And Emma Garcia, who was a teenager, an older teenager in Venice, who Marguerite had gotten acquainted with through one of her groups, became our first secretary. So there we were. Well, we didn't have an office, and we'd have staff meetings in the car, and we'd go around and look for office space, and had part of a photography shop offered to us, but that wouldn't have very much privacy somehow. We finally ended up with part of the ground floor of an old hotel whose picture you have. By the time we got there was no lagoon in front of it, but a traffic circle, and across the street was the post office. And so we were in business, and we began going around to schools, juvenile officers, DPSS, everybody who could give us any clues to where we might find our clients. And I remember when Marguerite went to talk to the principal at Venice High, she called a couple of girls in, and one of the girls said, "You mean we could have our own club? We could elect our own officers?" And Marguerite said, "Yes." Well, as it turned out, I don't think they ever elected officers because they didn't really want to. But it was nice to be able.
Yes, of course.
So we developed a few boys groups and a few girls groups, and we got started. And then the next thing was the acquisition of station wagons, because truly many of these youngsters had never been out of Venice or out of West LA.
I can believe that.
Yeah. And as we developed different programs. We tried to get them out and give them some new experiences. They didn't feel very good about themselves. I can remember one girl saying, we're no good. We were born no good. And so, of course,
It's on.
it goes sometimes.
Record.
Another time, another gal was in trouble at the high school because she didn't attend school, and she wouldn't say why she was out. But we found that she was out because her mother was drunk and she was taking care of her younger sister. You know all these kinds of stories. But anyway, that's background of NYA.
Okay, proceed.
Because the board was enthusiastic about the move to the new locality and the new focus, and the small staff was excited about the whole concept, we had the beginning of what continued for many years to be a nearly ideal board and staff relationship. With respect and understanding for the role of each, contacts were frequent between board and staff members, with staff presentations a usual part of board meetings. Problems as well as successes were shared. Board members understood why intensive work with groups, their individual members, their parents, and community agencies related to them were essential and required time, which preclude large numbers of clients per worker.
Oh, yes.
Staff, too, were given the opportunity to see the difficulties of the board in securing the funds that all recognized as being needed. In the beginning, funds were really scarce, as I said, $20,000 for a whole year. We had no office, no supply, and just 3 of us on the staff. But we could begin and make these community contacts I told you about that led to the formation of the early groups. None of us in the beginning had MSWs, but we began to feel the need of more knowledge, more disciplined type of knowledge, and by 1951, all of us had decided to go to graduate school for our MSWs. By that time, we had added 2 MSWs to our staff. Betty Schwartz, who for the next 16 years provided exceptional leadership and guidance to many teenage girls in the Venice and West LA area, and supervision to a number of fieldwork students from USC School of Social Work. The second one, Sarah Maloney Porter, was acting executive when I attended USC and later received her doctorate at Western Reserve and went on to teach social work at USC. Oh, this brings you up to date with many of the things that went on at Neighborhood Youth, except that we began to grow and we expanded our work to Wilmington, and we took caseworkers on our staff to work with the families, and thinking that youngsters would move faster if the families were helped at the same time. As a matter of fact, as this follow-up study you have will show that was not the case. And I think it was explained because we were working with adolescents who had moved away from the family. And the family never paid too much attention to them in many cases anyway. And there were a few cases where the families really got involved in the casework, and we did find more movement there.
Oh, of course.
But on the whole, what the group worker could do with the girls and working within the group and individually was just about as helpful if they couldn't get more backup help at home. And one of the things that we discovered was that in violation of a principle we had heard about group work, that you couldn't really single out an individual to work with in the group because the others would resent it. Quite the contrary, if it was based on a need of the individual, we've had group members say to us, You go see him. He needs you. You ought to let him talk to you.
That's interesting.
I think so, don't
and
you?
And refreshing, yeah.
Yeah. So it depends on why you're seeing the individual. Yeah. So, that's pretty much the story of NYA. And it isn't either, because in the late 50s we hired a trained group worker to work with community activity aids, a CAA program.
Oh, that's important.
That's very important, and it had its pitfalls and its good features.
What were the pitfalls?
Pitfalls in both the cases, that the group we had in Wilmington and the CAAs here, were, I think, partly in the fact that this relationship I had hoped had been established always with board and staff members did not take place so well with the new staff.
Oh.
That was part of it. There was if you remember, this was an outgrowth in a way of the war on poverty and all kinds of things in there. And I think both of the young men we hired, though one I thought was much more qualified than the other, but both of them were so excited about having a program that they felt was their own, that they never could tie it to the agency.
I see.
Now, in fact, the Wilmington group ultimately went off and had a program for young children all on its own and continued to get funding from one of the outfits in the state. But the CAAs did a lot of very good things, too. And one of the things that I remember very well about them was that they, Vermont McKinney, who directed that program, got strong contacts going with UCLA neuropsychiatric department. And the CAAs would get young men and women who were addicted to drugs, and they'd get them, and we by that time had hired a little bungalow court, and there was a room in there where they'd take these people to get them ready to go to UCLA to be detoxed. Mm-hmm. And it was pretty hard to see some of these young ones come in. Some of them young mothers, some of them expectant mothers.
Oh dear, yes.
But it was, I thought the CAAs did an excellent job in getting them to the point of readiness to accept this kind of treatment.
Of course.
So that was an exciting thing. It did not mean that our troubles with the police were over, because the CAAs often would defy the police, and the police would defy the CAAs. So you know what that's like.
Yes.
There was one person on the police staff that came in to Venice when things were awfully tough down there once, Jesse Brewer, who seemed to have a very keen understanding of the whole community picture, and he'd put two and two together and saved the day more than once.
That's helpful.
Yeah. Well, then we had the project with the YWCA, in which we tried to help another agency to take on this kind of work with the youngsters who don't necessarily gravitate to the YWCA. And we have reports on most of those projects in there. That pretty much concludes my story of NAA, and I think you got the good parts and the bad in there. After I left there, because I thought it was time for a change, both for the agency and for me, I coordinated a single-parent project for the United Way, which was quite interesting. We worked with, we got a great many of our referrals from the Big Sister League, who had been working some with them, and our objective here was to get community agencies putting on some special efforts on behalf of these single parents.
Yeah.
They were single parents who were frequently pretty lost. I know I spoke to a group once, and was at some meeting in Los Angeles, and there were a lot of single parents there, but they weren't our kids.
Oh.
They were the ones who were delighted to be single parents and getting along just fine. So, but with ours, what we tried to do, we used small groups there, and the mothers and the babies came to the groups together, and we tried to help the mothers to connect with needed services because they really didn't know too much about them. Sometimes mean taking them to the services, and also help them to be better mothers. And one of the most interesting things I saw in it was that the babies who had been pretty much isolated in a one-room apartment with their mother and seemed fearful of other children or of adults began to gradually move out to other little kids in there and to the adults and without fear and much more comfortably. Now, we involved the Big Sister League, we involved Children's Home Society, NYA for a short while. I think it was the Pomona YWCA, and the maternity homes in developing similar groups. And one of the weaknesses, I think, in all of our programs is that we don't have enough follow-up on them to know what happens later. Now, I do know that Children's Home Society maintained groups for several years after I was out of the project. I'm afraid we're all too mobile, and the people who can get the most in follow-up are no longer around at the agency.
That happens.
You wanted me to say a little bit more about board and staff relations?
Yes.
To me, this was a significant thing because I'd always been in favor of people doing the work, having the conditions that are necessary in order to do it.
Yeah.
And some of the board members would have no unless they were brought in contact with it. But we didn't bring them in contact with the kids. We didn't want to do that.
No.
But we certainly could bring them in contact with the workers who could tell them about
Just go on and see if it is.
Important as it was for the board to understand the complexities of the staff member's job, I think it was equally important for the staff to understand some of the complexities and demands made of the board.
Oh, definitely.
The problems that they faced, and that they could not wave a wand and get all the money in the world, and they could not do that. And they had to have community pressures on them, and they had to know enough about what was going on to be able to answer some of the criticisms that might come, because if you're dealing with children verging on delinquency, you're going to have some criticisms.
Definitely.
One thing I remember with great pleasure early in my days there, we had one young board member who thought the nicest thing she could do for the agency was to give Bible lessons to one of the girls' groups once a week. Well, I was quite sure that would be the end of that girls' group. So I talked to Bishop Gooden, who was then in his 80s, about this, and he said, well, no, Pat, I don't think that would be good at all. Just tell her you can't have it. So there are good things that come here. But increasingly, I thought also that the staff felt some understanding what the board's responsibilities were. Not perfect any more than the board perfectly understood the staff. But there was a mutual respect there that was a pleasant thing to have. And quite contrary to what happens in many agencies and certainly in many businesses, I think.
Of course.
Well, that's pretty much the story of NYA's development, and I think I told you about the single parent project too. And the same thing held there, and as I told you, it did go on in some of the agencies after I left the United Way, and I was glad of that.
Well, that's a very good review of
It is.